This is something that happened to me back when I was a 13-year-old boy in Boy Scouts. I'm 27 now and love listening to and reading scary stories online. This has recently got me thinking about the strange thing that happened to me back when I was a kid. I was a scout who lived near Tampa Bay. My whole troop originated from that area, so when a massive 3-week trip over summer to Lake Michigan came up, young me was certainly excited. We set off in the dead of night and were travelling by coach, which was quite possibly the worst way we could have got from A to B. My dad was on the trip too, having experience with children and the scouts, and this made me even more excited to show off some of the skills I had learnt at scouts to my old man. By the incident I'm going to share, the trip was amazing and still stands as one of my favourite vacations ever. After a few days of kayaking, hiking, rock climbing, animal tracking and foraging, we were camped in some tents not too far from the lakeside. It was late evening and we were all sat around a campfire telling stories and singing songs. The scout leader told us it was time for bed and insisted he would keep the fire burning for the kids who were afraid of the dark. My dad winked at me as if to say, "Go to your tent." I did. About half an hour later, my dad unzipped my tent. I knew he would. "Psst, get Callum and Harry. We will tell scary stories by the campfire. Be quiet." I jumped up with excitement, waking my two friends. This is something my father often did on our trips, get us up in the dead of night and frighten us half to death with tales of ghosts, ghouls and monsters. It was always the best as our scout leader. He was a bit of a pansy and only loved camp songs and the very rare tale of adventure, which, don't get me wrong, were also good, just not bone-chilling. Me and my two friends snuck out of the tent silently and gathered around the fire where my dad sat, staring creepily for effect, as he always did. The night was cool that night, and the fire roared with warmth. My father began telling his famous scary stories to us young kids. We were struck by terror. He was telling us a story of some creature out in the Alaskan wilderness, back when he lived there, when a quick rustle came from the bushes behind us. My dad, who was facing the bushes, jumped and shone his light into the bushes, looking concerned. We all stifled laughs silently and fake yawned, not buying into my father's antics. He settled down and began telling his stories again, finishing up the tale of the strange creature when, again, a rustle came from behind us. And as I say, we were sat facing my dad, and my dad was sat facing us. Me, Harry and Callum turned to look as my dad once again lit up the trees. "Right, come sit over here," he said sternly. We were a bit scared now and the three of us leapt up and sat beside my dad, who continued surveying the bushes. The bushes rattled in front of our very eyes. We suddenly began to realise that this wasn't one of my dad's pranks. An unearthly snarl came from where the bush moved. Imagine if elephants ate humans. The noise we heard sounded like that would be their growl. We watched the bush for a little while longer and nothing else happened. Callum was tearing up in terror and my dad slowly raised a finger to his lips, beckoning us to be quiet. He pointed towards the tent, telling us to head back there silently, his eyes glued on the bushes. The same bone-shaking growl was unleashed and we started screaming as my dad shone his flashlight on the bushes. You could clearly see two large yellow eyes with focused black pupils. All the tents were unzipped and kids stuck their heads out inquisitively. The scout leader stormed over barefoot and asked what on earth was going on. We lied on the spot, saying we had all gone for a pee in the bushes and that my dad was just the first to respond to the commotion. All three of us, and my dad, told the scout leader about the noises in the bush and he waved it off and told us to go to sleep, shooting daggers at my father. As if that wasn't weird enough, deep into the second week of the trip, I woke, this time actually needing a pee. I unzipped my tent and proceeded to the nearest tree. It's worth noting that we had moved from the previous spot and were now in much denser woodland. I did my business, shook, and began heading back to my tent, about 35 to 40 feet away, when I heard loud snaps. I don't mean like twigs, I mean like creaks and loud snaps, like full tree branches snapping. I whipped around in fear to see those two yellow eyes about 10 feet up a tree. I screamed bloody murder, and those eyes produced the same tantalising growl as the last encounter, and then this thick beast moved away into the darkness, its fur a cool black. I explained myself to the scout leader and to my father through tears of panic and fear. The scout leader still didn't seem to believe me, and my dad held me, knowing I was telling the truth. The next morning, however, even the scout leader was confused when he noticed a large, thick branch had been snapped off a tree nearby to our camp. It was snapped from a point about 15 feet above us. Edit. After sharing this, it got me thinking about the whole incident, and I texted my dad, who told me to add this. The night me, you, Callum and Harry saw this thing, you probably remember its eyes were quite low down in the bush, maybe 4 or 5 feet. Well, I didn't want to alarm you at the time, but it was crouching, as if it were going to pounce. I remember when we were all running to the tents and I turned around to glance at the eyes once more. Like you claimed, they were roughly 10 feet up. Then it closed them and could not be seen. That is crazy, don't get me wrong, but there were other things that I never brought up, and perhaps I should have, and for that, son, I'm sorry. Up until the second encounter you had with this creature, whilst we had been camping at other spots, I could swear that this thing was following our troop. I would wake in the night to hear the menacing call it made and would find tree branches snapped, similar to the one from your encounter. To make it all the more frightening, I had a lone encounter with the beast too. Do you remember the first night it rained? That night, after everyone went to sleep, I tended the fire to help it burn through the night. I remember the feeling of someone, or something, watching me from the darkness, as if it wanted me but was too scared to come into the light. Then I heard a low rumble. To be honest, it was nothing like the one you and I both heard. I turned in my seat to see the two yellow eyes about 6 feet away from me, just about in the shadows. Its fur was as black as the night itself, and it was hunched over on all fours, like a gorilla though, where its front appendages were much larger. It snarled and revealed human-like teeth, but it had at least 8 razor-sharp canines. It seemed intelligent, as if it knew. It couldn't get me now. I was onto it, and it slowly slipped away into the darkness. I was terrified and didn't dare cross to the tents for at least 15 minutes, every snap, every creak, every whistle of wind, having me looking in every direction. I spoke to your scout leader about this, but I did it subtly so as not to look weird or overly concerned. If he did know about this, he damn well did a good job of hiding it. I live in Derbyshire, in the UK, in a little village called Castleton. It's tiny, having only a few small streets that wind through the rolling hills of the countryside. For a job, I work at the Blue John Cavern, about a 15-minute drive up the road. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of Blue John, it's a type of fluorite, but it is only found in this one location on Earth. If you've never seen it, I suggest you Google it because it's beautiful and it is often worked into jewellery, goblets and other objects to art. In fact, the village I live in, despite its size, has around 5 shops that make their money from the precious stone. Anyway, back to the cavern. Because of Blue John's rarity, it's actually seldom mined, and the mined goods are only ever shipped to Castleton. This means there is adequate scope for tours of the cavern to boost income and increase tourism in the area. Not only that, but us miners are the ones that give the tours too, so we're not just sat twiddling our thumbs when the mining is prohibited. Now, we're only a small team, but I know a few of my colleagues have shared their experiences here too, and I thought I'd share mine with you. It's never been recognised, but some spooky stuff does happen inside the cavern, and is probably to be expected given its long history. The story takes place at a time when I was on mining duty. It was about 8 PM and the cavern had been long since closed. I stayed behind late, something which isn't frowned upon but isn't recommended either. I offered to lock up as I'd be the last one out there and took one last quick walk around the tour route, which, let me tell you, is a lot of effort. It's basically a trail that goes deeper and deeper into the bowels of the cave system, and there are hundreds of steps to take. No lifts, no escalators. I was walking up the final set of stairs which leads to a gated entryway and then freedom, when I distinctly heard whistling from inside the cave. Just two distinct tones repeating slowly, creepily. High, low, high, low. Now, I thought it may have been one of my co-workers who I'm not going to name because I'm not sure how he'd feel about being featured in this. He's a proper jolly fella and is always humming, whistling and joking about on the tours. Now, I'm going off at a tangent here, but one of his favourite tricks is to pick up these massive painted display rocks that are made from polystyrene, pretend they are really heavy, and then throw them at people on the tour and shout, "Quick, catch!" It sounds harsh, but everyone I ever saw him do it to found it funny. Anyway, back to the story. I shouted his name down the stairs, partly too creeped out to go and look for him, and partly couldn't really be bothered, walking back down the stairs. The whistling abruptly stopped. I called his name again, but there was no answer from anyone. I noticed I was beginning to shake. "Hello?" I shouted. There were strange clicking sounds coming from the belly of the cavern. I was tempted to call someone, but I knew I'd have to wait around and I just wanted to get home. I checked the schedule and the colleague I thought was whistling had checked out. I took a breath, cursed, and set off down the steps with my torch, periodically shouting, "Hello!" The clicking was still coming. I've worked at the mine for quite some time and it sounded artificial. It didn't sound like water dropping or stones tapping. It sounded like a human. I reached the very end of the tour, which is like a balcony looking over to some of the oldest stalactites in the whole system. I realised the clicking had now stopped and I was becoming concerned and frustrated that somehow, someone had managed to leave the tour route and had ended up deep inside. I sat on a step for a moment to regain my breath. Even if I'm doing it 5 or 6 times a day, I still need a break. And as I was sat, regaining my wits, I heard a maniacal laugh coming from over the balcony. Over the balcony isn't a bottomless pit, but it falls down into a thinner and thinner hole filled with rock dust and gravel. The laugh seemed out of place, more reverberation than would be normal. Yes, more, and an almost in-the-wind sort of vibe to it, as if it was being carried through the air. I cautiously walked over to the rail and peered over down into the cavern. There was no one there. I shone my torch and called out for anyone who may need help. I received no response. I waited for a moment when, from above the balcony, on a few set of steps where the tour guide tends to stand when giving tours due to its high, open positioning, I heard 2 loud, crisp claps. Guess what? That spot was empty. I hauled ass straight back up the 250 odd steps, called my co-worker who should have been locking up that day, and she actually came back. I begged her, but I didn't think she would. We searched the whole place from top to bottom, even all the private access mines and everything in between. We found nothing. We didn't hear any other spooky sounds either. Since that day, I very rarely stay behind late, and if I do, I always try and get out quick. I found out about Urbex in about 2011, but living in quite a small, middle of nowhere kind of place, I had to improvise, and I've been searching in and around old mines, sort of like that YouTube channel, exploring abandoned mines and unusual places. Well, that's like me, but I only take pictures. I do it as a hobby, but keep meaning to post some pictures online and maybe even one day publish a book. Okay, so I was at this mine, the Glass Bottle Mine, an odd little place with this amazing glass bottle sculpture. I think it's some sort of surveyor. In fact, when researching this, I could find nothing on it other than a video posted by Exploring Mines and Unusual Places, and let me tell you, he's right. You do literally have to stumble across it. I had no idea it was there. I recommend you go and watch his video to get an idea of the layout of the whole place. It's like it's trapped in time. There's still old jackets and furniture packed inside the tin shack, and a kooky little sign above one of the portals. The mines were, for the most part, quite small, with one going no more than 10 feet deep. There was also a semi-long tunnel that led to 2 dead ends. This basically meant that I was taking more pictures of the glass bottle structure, the tin shack, and other surrounding features like the cart tracks and some of the old mid-century relics. I waited about till dark. I find it often gives my photographs a certain edginess, but I stumbled across a portal I hadn't yet noticed throughout my trip there. I decided to enter the cavern. It seemed so cold and uninviting. I know you're probably thinking, well, duh, it's a cave, but you're reading this from a guy who relishes life in caves and mines. It was weird, so I proceeded with caution, wondering if my sixth sense was tingling due to some unknown predator lurking deeper within. I came to a stop near a set of red ladders that dropped down about 5 or maybe even slightly less feet. You could clearly see the bottom and it wasn't very deep. I was considering climbing down to have a quick search down there when a strange rattle seemed to come from within. I pulled back slightly and held my breath, struck by fear of the unknown. The clanks continued, sounding like old metal chains or shackles. I stayed dead silent. What on earth could it be? I'd been here all day, and although I didn't find this particular portal till late in the day, I had crossed paths with no one else, and it was too far out of the way for a bum to be squatting there. I knew there and then that I should head back, but I couldn't. Urbex was something that gave me a thrill. Was I really going to just turn down the one opportunity to potentially find something crazy? I edged forward, careful to be quiet. Then I heard a very loud, powerful thud come from beneath, followed immediately by a ghostly scream from within the cave directly in front of me. It was a haunting male scream that dragged out for ages, creepily fading into the mine walls. I ran as fast as I could through the cave, bashing into the walls continually. I toppled out into the darkness and ran away from that place as fast as I could. Given the lack of history on the place, I can't be too sure, but the mine seemed like a small project, one which I feel was abandoned before any deaths. However, mining was a dangerous job, so I can't be too sure. In hindsight, I feel I should have used my camera to record the sounds, but in the moment, I didn't think and was struck with fear. Perhaps I'll get back out there someday soon. I live in a large cabin deep in the woods of rural New Hampshire. I'm 52 years old and I'm a retired engineer who worked on many Silicon Valley startup companies in the 80s and 90s. I love my cabin and I love the woods too. I often find myself hiking the area for hours, looking at all the flora and fauna and tending to my garden, which is basically a small patch of said woods. I also enjoy camping out in the woods. It keeps me in touch with nature and is a bit of a detox, yet I'm very close to my home in case of an emergency. This happened to me on one of those nights when I was out camping. I am by no means a hunter. I've personally never seen a point in it. I much prefer just watching the wildlife and let it flourish as much as I can. As such, I had no firearm with me. Mistake number 1. Also, like I say, I use these trips to sort of detox, and I keep technology to a minimum, so I had no cell with me. Mistake 2. It was late into the night and there was a light rain in the air. Being in a tent, it sounded quite loud, but it was only a light shower. As such, I was lay reading a book by torchlight, and I didn't hear the sound of snapping twigs until it sounded as though it was about a foot away. I looked up from my reading and slowly clutched my bear spray. I sat still and steady and tuned my ears against the rain. I could just about make out soft breathing, similar to that of a person. I called out into the night, asking who was there. I received no response, but there was no sound of scattered footsteps either. It was calm, as if whoever was there casually stepped back into the rest of the woods. I left it about 5 minutes and made sure I couldn't hear anything else. Then I quietly unzipped my tent and shone my flashlight on the lowest setting. It's worth noting, I was in a very small clearing, just on my own land. A clearing I had made by chopping down a few trees. I caught sight of an anomaly on the trunk of a tree. I walked over. I winced in horror, as I found a note pinned to the bark that simply read, "Run." I erratically scanned the trees, looking for a person that I assumed was watching me from the dark. "Give up! This is private property! I have a gun!" I lied. Time seemed frozen as sweat beads flashed down my head in the light drizzle. Then, for my safety, I headed towards the safety of my cabin, at pace. It was no more than a 5-minute run from where I was camping, but in the darkness, it was even more difficult to traverse. I was running in zigzags, so whoever it was couldn't easily target me. I was starting to believe that there may be no one there. I was wrong. Thwoosh! Thunk! I saw the coloured flight of an arrow that was lodged in a tree in front of me. I felt it whiz past my head. A bow. That would certainly do some damage. I could see my cabin off in the distance, and I knew I needed to continue. Thwoosh! I heard it skittle through twigs. I was absolutely pooing myself. I was the prey to this sick fuck's game. I could see the patio doors as light spilled across the ground from the security lights. I ran into my back door, fumbled with my keys shakily, and began unlocking the door. I saw him, a hooded figure, stood just outside of the light. He drew his bow. I flung open the door and hit the deck as my back window shattered, flinging glass everywhere and sending another arrow into the wall in front of me. I ran through the dining room and locked that door behind me. If he wanted, he could easily break the door, but I was hoping to deter him. I ran straight upstairs, into my bedroom, which the door for had no lock, quickly grabbed my cell and ran to the bathroom, locking it immediately. I phoned the police and waited. It took them over an hour to arrive, mainly due to my location, and when they did, they found the dining room door had not been broken. The guy had left after I reached the sanctuary of my home, and as far as I'm aware, he was never caught. I very rarely go camping in the woods anymore, but I've tried to not let this ruin nature for me. I was backpacking alone some time ago in the Aravaipa Canyon in Arizona. I had been diagnosed with depression and decided to take a step back and reset, taking in the beautiful sights and arid scenery that Arizona offers. Nothing actually happened to me per se, but I've heard a lot about the sacred grounds in Arizona and the folklore that is associated with it. Maybe that was playing on my mind. I just don't know. It was late into the evening and I was unable to get to sleep this particular night, so I decided to hike through the night, or at least until I became tired and wanted to stop. It was nice in the cool night air. The area I was passing through was a lovely little area, nice greenery scattered along the dry landscape that curved and twisted with ancient erosion. I felt overwhelmed with dread. It was out of the blue. One moment I was drinking in the twilight scenery, The next moment, I'm looking over my shoulder and trying to spot figures in the distance. My heart was inexplicably racing and I began to perspirate. I was shining my flashlight all over the show, despite being sure I was alone. But then a bush shook behind me. I turned on my heels just in time to see it come to a dead stop. Somehow. I stopped and walked back towards it to investigate. There was nothing. There was no breeze either, and the bush was quite sturdy. I still don't know who, or what, moved the shrubbery. And I kept walking, wanting now to leave the area before I came to a stop. My adrenaline was peaking anyway, so I didn't feel at all tired. I couldn't explain this feeling, and I can't stress that enough. Somehow, off in the distance, I heard an ominous bird call. In the middle of the night. I couldn't identify the bird by its call, but I feel it shouldn't be around skulking or hunting at this time. I saw a spot up ahead where I planned on stopping for the night, but my sight was directed towards a gravelly hillside. There, almost peeking from behind a bush, I saw two shiny glimmers, little bead-like things, like a cat's eyes. They could have been stones gleaming in the moonlight, but I shuddered, and admittedly, just ran away. I ran straight past the spot I was going to camp at, and kept going. It was weird though. When I reached a certain point, the weight of fear and paranoia just lifted. There was no reason for it to diminish as it did, which made the whole thing all the weirder. Like I say, I have no reason to have felt this way, and the rest of my travels were uneventful in terms of paranormal activity and strange feelings, but I wonder if I stepped onto some ancient tribal grounds. Me and my pal, let's call him Mike, were out in the woods in an undisclosed US state hunting game. The weather didn't hold too well and there was a downpour on our first night. We were night hunting and were set up in our ghillie suits when I caught sight of something through the night vision scope on my gun. I readied my finger on the trigger and was moments away from firing when I saw that it was a human, a man, judging by the stature. I was perplexed. What on earth was a guy doing walking through the middle of dense woods in hunting season at night in the rain? Mike seemed just as confused and we stayed quiet, deciding not to track the guy who appeared unarmed but agreeing we would be extra vigilant. Some time passed, and it was probably 2 in the morning and we had settled down from the edginess of the strange man. That was until I was sweeping the area and caught him in my scope again, just stood in between 2 trees, staring right at us. Now, like I say, we were ghillied up and hidden in some bush, which was very near to a large tree. We were totally dark. This guy seemed to have no identifiable equipment, but seemed to be looking right at us. I pulled away from my scope and looked out into the pitch black. I could see absolutely nothing, let alone a man stood about 200 feet away. I put the scope back to my eye, and the guy had fucking gone. Just disappeared. Mike hadn't been watching him this time, and had no idea of the ordeal I'd just been through. I told him we'd have to go and look because it was too much, and he reluctantly agreed. We headed over to the clearing with pace. Thank God it wasn't a full sprint. I remember being close to reaching where the man had been and then Mike yanking me back by my shoulder just as I felt myself losing my footing. He pulled out a mag light and shone it down. There, directly in front of where I had seen this bastard, was a large hole, big enough for 2 men, dug into the earth, spiked sticks driven into the ground, sharp end up. Classic pitfall trap. In my mind, there is no way this was set up for an animal. The guy somehow knew we were there and lured us to this spot. We turned to head back to the bush and were met with a disgusting sight. From a low, hanging branch of one of the trees, a mysterious man had been stood between was a rabbit hanging by its neck, its body split down the middle, fresh blood draining out of it. I know we were in those woods to hunt, but that wasn't hunting. That was fucking slaughter. All the meat was still on the animal. Its fur was left and its skin had been practically untouched. We both simultaneously covered our mouths in disgust, and I shook my head. We headed back to our bush, thinking we'd stay low and try and scope this guy out again. And that's when I saw the most disturbing thing I've ever come across in my entire life. And I've seen human centipede. There, nailed, yes, nailed to the tree behind our bush, was a full-sized adult deer, easily 200 pounds, maybe more. It was sliced down its belly again and had had its ribcage snapped outwards. Blood was gushing and its entrails hung loosely from the carcass. It was fresh, and it definitely hadn't been there before. Weirder still, we heard nothing. No sounds of a struggle, no gunfire, no sound of this beast being nailed to a fucking tree. We were gone 3 minutes, hardly long enough for someone to do that, and that made me think, maybe there was more than one guy. The sound of multiple twigs snapping came from close behind, and we just ran. We ran, and we ran, and we ran, and we didn't stop. The full hour trip back to the truck. When we reached the parking lot, we were horrified to see that all our tyres were flat. On closer inspection, they had been sliced. Paranoia crept over the both of us as we erratically looked around the secluded car park and into the dark woods. There were no other cars in the parking lot. We decided we'd drive it flat for at least a mile, just to get some distance between us and possible death. I told Mike to call the Rangers whilst we had signal and we started up the vehicle. I slammed on the accelerator and burned it out of the lot. Looking in my mirror, I saw a guy, dressed totally in black and wearing a ski mask, stood in the middle of the gravel lot, watching us leave. We were in obvious shock, but somehow managed to piece our ordeal together coherently enough for the Rangers to get a solid idea of what happened. They found the deer and the rabbit still pinned and hanging to the trees. They found the pitfall, and they also found a mound of skeletal remains of various animals. They found no evidence of anyone or anything else. Something else that just adds to how fucked up this whole ordeal was when we told the ranger that there were no other cars in the lot. He seemed confused as to how somebody with no backpack or torch wearing a thin black jacket could have got here. He told us that the nearest property was 33 miles away. One of the scariest things that has ever happened to me was the time me and my then 13-year-old son were caught in a forest fire. It was the summer holidays and we drove down from Oregon to North California. We had a week planned of camping and I had pre-booked some activities like kayaking, abseiling and other stuff like that. Knowing what we would be doing over the course of the week, I picked a spot that we could stay at for the full week that would be central to all the places we needed to go. Said place was a designated, I think, camp spot in a large clearing in the middle of tall, surrounding trees. Me and my son had a great time bonding. The first day, we fished for our meals for the next few days. The second day, we went kayaking, and the third day, we ended up swimming and cliff jumping into a river. The third night was when it all fell apart. I woke to my son screaming at the top of his lungs. Once I'd fully come to, I realised how swelteringly hot it was and could hear the snaps and cracks of tinder. The soft glow of flames was encompassing the whole tent. I told my son to stay put, unzipped the tent and walked into the inferno. It was hot and the air was thick with smoke. Given the size of the clearing, the smoke was our biggest danger. My throat was coarse and my eyes burnt. I looked around and we were trapped in a ring of fire, the trees in every direction, burning like a giant pyre. I called for help as loud as I could, but it was futile. Smoke clogged my throat and I was barely audible over the sound of raw flame. I doubted we'd even be spotted given how thick the clouds of smoke were. I told my son to come out, shield himself from the wind direction against the tent, and stay low to the ground and to shout me if he felt the smoke obstructing his breathing. He was surprisingly calm and collected and immediately did as I said. I grabbed our shovel and began digging a trench. I don't know if it helps given we were in a clearing, but I wanted to be safe. I tried staying low but could feel the smoke's restriction on my lungs. I abandoned the trench and lay, huddling with my son. As the hours ticked by, I began to embrace the idea of death, and I'd be lying if I didn't tell you I was contemplating jumping into the flames rather than slow cooking and suffocating to death. I remember when the firemen found us. It was like our guardian angels had come to us. We were half naked due to the intense heat and covered in a thick layer of grey from the ash. We were airlifted to a hospital and, thank God, and healthcare. We both made full recoveries. We found out that we had been stranded there for 18 hours in all, and given that I was beginning to fall in and out of consciousness, I'm not sure how much longer we would have lasted. Me and my son both owe our lives to the brave firemen and women who came to our rescue that day, and against all the odds, found and saved us. Hey guys, Brothers Jackson here. That's 7 true scary stories, perfect for a campfire. I hope you enjoyed it. There was a broad mix of stories, a lot taking place in the woods and mines, like places of isolation. I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if you could tell that by the narration. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more quality videos. Thank you so much for all your support, guys. I really can't stress that enough. Every week you're liking videos, you're commenting, you're really helping me out. So keep doing what you're doing and peace out. Thank you.